Purple Daily is daily Vikings entertainment. We just want the Vikings to win a Super Bowl before we die.
I will ride with this group.
Seriously, man. Please.
And away we go.
Happy Thor's Day on a Sunday here to all who celebrate. A surprise live stream here on this late Sunday morning before Judd and I head over to Target Center for Game 4 of Wolves and Lakers. But draft weekend is over, and we got our guy Thor Nystrom from Matthew Berry's FantasyLife.com here to recap. Gentlemen, how are we feeling this morning?
Doing great. That was a wild weekend. I said that to you guys before the show, and you're like, "It's not done." Then you explained to me the Timberwolves season is still going. So that's
in Judd's mind, well, we're not done with the weekend, but Thor's guy, I just haven't slept in 6 weeks. So
firework left. Yeah,
I thought you were talking about moving on to the UDFA class rankings, which is my next step of the process. But wild weekend, and we have a lot to talk about with the Vikings decisions. I thought it was interesting, an interesting weekend for them, and then the UDFA class afterwards. But lots to get to.
Well, Judd, let's I'll throw it to you. Start it wherever you want here with Thor. We got 5 draft picks, and we won't go too deep into the UDFAs, but there's a small handful of pretty high profile UDFAs, 19 total undrafted free agents. So Judd, where do you want to start this thing?
I want to start with your thoughts on the 5-pick draft class.
Where do you want to begin?
Your thoughts on like how Crazy and company did in the past 3 days, as far as this ties for, I believe, the smallest draft class in franchise history. Somewhere Rick Spielman with the Jets is so upset right now because he's like, I left that franchise. We were trying to get 17 picks per draft. So a very small draft class, which means that optimally you hit on as many as possible because you're not throwing the amount of darts that Spielman once did. So what were your overall takeaways of this class?
So let's start from the treetops, and then we can zoom in and talk about the prospects individually. But the environment that you entered, you're Kwesi, you're one of the 32 poker players at the table as Bell opens on Thursday. You come in last in the NFL in draft picks. You had 4. You come in last in the NFL in draft equity by margin. I'm talking about the aggregate value of the picks that you hold at that time. You had very little flexibility unless you wanted to dip into next year's draft, but you were in the predicament that you were in because you had done that with this class in order to get Dallas Turner, right? So that the referendum on that will be coming. But Kwesi, a guy who loves his flexibility, he has talked about that vis-a-vis the salary cap. He did not have a lot in this class. And so that was sort of the circumstance. And then the environment we got in when Bell opened on Thursday, where a team looking for immediate trench help on either side of the ball, I believe that they leaned offensive line. I don't think that's lip service. That was something I was hearing before as well. But I think defensive line, certainly there's a circumstance where they would have gone with that guy. The problem was the top 3 offensive tackles go top 9. That was a bullish run, right? I mean, some of the in a lot of mocks, you'd see the Bears at 10 taking one. You'd see the Dolphins at 13 taking one. There was a lot of mocks, as you guys know, where Kelvin Banks Jr. was falling to the Vikings. We had some fun with that late in the process with the PFF mock machine. Turns out the Vikings never had any shot of even being within shouting distance of Kelvin Banks Jr. But those guys go out the board top 9. Then Tyler Booker goes 12. That if you didn't have the ringing siren of we are in a bullish market for offensive linemen, that gave it to you. And then you were on Gray Zabel watch. And I have to imagine inside the Vikings war room, they're just every pick that goes by where Gray Zabel's name is not said, you're sighing a sigh of relief. And then you start sweating when Seattle announces his name. And it's not necessarily because Gray Zabel was the guy for the Vikings. Absolutely could have been. But it was the dichotomy of once he is off the board, Donovan Jackson is your last stop at the train station as far as immediate help on the offensive line that you can trust for sure. This guy is a day one starter at left guard. And then meanwhile, the other position that you're prominently considering, the interior defensive line, the top 4 consensus interior defensive linemen go off the board by the was it 21st slot? Pittsburgh taking Derek Harmon was the last one. So you can't take one of those guys either. In my opinion, the Lions egregiously reached for their interior defensive lineman that they took. What was that? 5 slots later, Tyleik Williams. They had to do that because all the other interior defensive linemen were off the board. So you didn't want to reach there. There were the trades available. The slot right behind the Vikings, that got a trade. And then the 1-2 after them, that was our friend Terrible Terry Fontenot getting involved in stealing from the future to attempt to save his job by trading next year's first round pick with the Rams. Anyway, ostensibly, in theory, you would have had access to at least one of those offers. I have to imagine the one right after that the Giants made to move up for Jackson Dart with Houston, that was on the table for you. Terrible Terry, I don't know if he, was that a desperation as a stinky cologne, like in the moment with the Rams? I'm not sure. I'd be curious to hear if the Vikings, if that was an offer on the table for them. I'm pretty sure that Houston bailed out of the next slot after the Vikings because the Vikings took Donovan Jackson. I think Houston was in the exact same scenario as the Vikings were. Maybe their secondary position wasn't interior defensive line, but their offensive line need was even way more pressing than the Vikings is. So they're monitoring the board the same. And that last immediate day one starter on the offensive line that you would feel good about, he goes off the board one slot before you. So you end up bailing out of the pick. On my board, I think I had Donovan Jackson 30. I saw him as a late first round pick, but I've made this point before. When you're stacking a big board, you have my job. You're doing it in a vacuum. You don't have an offensive scheme. You don't have a defensive scheme. And so system fits and all that sort of stuff. You just sort of, ballpark all that type of stuff. And then the circumstance that you're in with the specific market you're in when the draft opens, obviously I can't bake that in advance either, much less predict it. Right. I mean, some of these things are unpredictable. And so in that market where the offensive linemen, they are going for the higher price points than all of us expected. Right. I compare it to the consensus boards out there. Like if you don't, so they were all getting Booker went way above his.
Real quick, are you of the mind that, and it's hard because like you said, we don't have access to what their board, vertical, horizontal look like relative to scheme, system, everything. But do you think the decision, let's say they had access to those 2 third-round picks, the Giants deal, would you have moved back into the second round, collected the 2 extra picks, and then see what the board looks like? Or do you think Donovan Jackson is a better fit for the Vikings than the extra draft capital that they potentially turned down from the Giants?
I would not have done the Jackson Dart, or I wouldn't have done that one right behind him. The one where I would have had to consider is if Terrible Terry called.
Yeah.
You guys know if I was sitting in that seat, anytime Terrible Terry wants to call when the draft's going, phone line's open, pal. Any ideas you got? We're here for you.
We accept before you even say the offer. We're in.
Just it's like the auto draft or whatever with any of his offers. That's the one where if I would have had to think really seriously about it, but you can't do in my opinion, the one that Houston took, because again, if Vikings don't take Donovan Jackson or they bail out further, the team, they bail out before, and then the team that trades up doesn't take Donovan Jackson. I don't think Houston takes the trade that Houston takes. I think they take Donovan Jackson. Okay. Right. So the one that, you could have thought about is if Terrible Terry had made that call to you, because there is a shot that the Falcons flatline next year, and that everyone starts getting fired and that sort of thing. And then that pick ends up being a monster asset. But that aside, yes, you had to stick and pick. The reason you couldn't take the Giants pick is because Donovan Jackson isn't going to be available to you at the 34 slot. Again, he would have been the next selection in this sliding doors reality. And then the defensive linemen are already long gone. So at the 34 slot, if you want to address one of those positions, you were setting yourself up for now we're going to have to reach. So, right. So I know people are like,
go defense or go secondary, right?
The idea being like, you turned down trade value to overdraft this guy. That was sort of the hints out there that some people had. But if you move down and then you egregiously reach for someone at one of those positions, is that not the same sort of lost cost, a lost cost fallacy there being made? Right. Because exactly. That's what you're going to have to do unless you defer positions.
Yeah. And that would actually go back to, if that were to happen, to 2022, which of course is the nightmare scenario now in the building as well. So on Jackson, do you so you know, clearly, and it makes perfect sense, project him as a day one starter at left guard. And I know he's not a left tackle, but he kicked out there for the Buckeyes. How much do you think that influenced the Vikings thinking, Thor? And also, if there is anything that goes wrong with Derisaw's knee, do you think that he is a viable left tackle as well as left guard now in the National Football League?
I think what he showed is that he has break glass in case of emergency tackle. I mean, that literally was the case at Ohio State last year in October. They were in a disastrous situation, and their only bullet to try to rectify it was have Donovan Jackson kick out there on the fly, and he buttoned that down and was dominant down the stretch, including in the college football playoff. So I don't know at left tackle that. I don't know if I'd break that glass. I think right tackle, I think you could be comfortable with, but left tackle at the NFL, it's a different beast. So sight unseen. I don't know if I could say that, but you do give the down the stretch. He was awesome left tackle last year for Ohio State. And not only that, but also just the football integrity that showed, or the integrity period of your team needs you. You're a national title contender. This Colossus roster we've built up, it is threatened to be sunk right now because of this one key injury, and we don't have good depth at this position. And Donovan, we know that this is, the end of the season here. This is, the most important part of your job interview for the NFL and putting good stuff on tape. But we're going to kick you out to left tackle as we get into the murderer's row portion of our schedule. He dominated at left tackle, and that was great for the on-field thing. But just the fact that he would do it, I also think speaks really, really highly to the kid. Former 5-star recruit, 3-year starter, 800 plus snaps each of the last 3 years at Ohio State. Obviously, top-notch program there. I think he's the best guard in this class. I ranked him ahead of Tyler Booker in my pre-draft. Longest wingspan of the IOL class, Donovan Jackson, and that was some of the stuff, you see at tackle, even more creating the space out there and getting depth. He's a hammer in the run game, Donovan Jackson, scheme versatile. So, I mean, any garnish they have with that, he can fit all that different stuff. And then speaking to down the stretch at left tackle, allowed 0 sacks and 2 pressures over 4 games in the college football playoff. That included a game with James Pierce. Donovan Jackson also played well against Abdul Carter, the number 3 overall pick in this class. Really, really like Donovan Jackson's game. And in the environment you were in, that was the correct price point, and that was the correct decision. Even if it wasn't sexy, the board did not break right for the Vikings. You do not always get a shot to get the grand slam and the sexy pick, especially when you don't have maneuverability. Some cases, just hitting it down the fairway is the correct decision. And Kwesi sort of made that metaphor when he was talking about that pick, and I totally agree with that. That's what you had to do there, is just keep the ball in the fairway.
So it sounds like thumbs up, kind of all around here on Donovan Jackson process, etc. So let's close that part of the draft and go to the other 4 picks here that the Vikings made. They facilitated a couple other trades. They moved back from 97 to 102 to take Maryland wide receiver Tai Felton. And then they wound up swinging. Well, they swung a couple other trades because they traded for Judd's guy, Sam Howell, to be their backup quarterback, moving 30 spots back in the 5th round. And then they traded 5th round pick for 2 6th round picks. They wound up with 5 picks. But Tai Felton, Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins, the edge rusher from Georgia, Kobe King, linebacker, Penn State, and then tight end Gavin Bartholomew from Pitt. Your thoughts on the rest of the process here for Kwesi and the Vikings?
We'll go. You want to go one by one?
Why don't you give us a 30,000-foot thought on the rest of the draft, and then give us your thoughts individually on these guys? We can kind of go from there.
The rest of it, I like the again, you don't have many assets. The one big decision that you had to make there was at the end of round 3. You mentioned that they skipped down a few picks. They moved up however many slots. They didn't pick up an extra pick in that one, but they moved up a bunch of slots on day 3.
Yeah, it was like 30 slots or something.
Yeah, in order to facilitate that. And your decision there was the position that you were going to prioritize. Thought it was interesting. It was wide receiver. Don't necessarily disagree, though. And we can talk about that with specific regards to Tai Felton here in a little bit. But then, you get into Friday. They obviously prioritized the projectable guy in Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins from Georgia. Again, we'll talk specifically more about his game here in a second. But then at the end, I thought it was interesting. The 5th round pick that they had, what Kwesi did with that, in order, like how he split that. So basically what you ended up doing, I think there was some interesting transaction stuff going on here. So the 142nd pick overall in the 5th round, Kwesi turned that pick into Sam Howell and the
172. Yeah.
Well, I'm talking both those trades smushed together. It would have been so over 2 trades, but 142 for Sam Howell, 201 and 202. I don't care who you are. That's slick work. Because one of the offshoots of it is Sam Howell. What does he have? Is it 2 years left on the rookie deal? I believe
it's 3 years in.
It's final year.
Final year. Okay.
Yeah.
Either way, you just saved a whole bunch of money on the backup money that everyone is trying to give out for you to the QB2. This is the more sage plan. You are saving $9 million this year on the cap with your backup quarterback situation, having done this, and you gave up nothing. Right? I mean, Howell, in addition to 201 and 202 for 142, just the money saved on the backup quarterback situation makes that transaction worth it. So I thought that was interesting too. And then you multiply that pick as well. So I thought that was well done. As far as the prospects themselves, Tai Felton, really interesting. Right when that pick came in, probably like a lot of people out there, I thought about Stephon Diggs. Stephon Diggs, a guy who came out of Maryland and had some issues with his evaluation at the time. Durability was one of them. His attitude was something that the people thought as well. And there was some raw elements to his game, but the upside was there. And he stayed healthy in the pros, and some of those raw aspects of his game were polished off. Some people might say he's still a little bit of a diva, but that turned out not to matter. They got amazing value out of that contract. Was an utter steal. With Tai Felton also coming out of Maryland, you don't have the attitude stuff. By all accounts, seems like a great kid. The game, though, is interesting. Right? There's a couple things he's got to fix. And if he does, they got something on their hands here. But what he has, it's all world speed. He ran a 4.37, I believe, at the NFL Combine. Said afterwards that he was disappointed because he didn't run a 4.35 like he had been running in the pre-draft testing. He was also disappointed that he only jumped at 39.5 vertical, which is dang near elite. He thought he was going to get over 40. And if you saw, he was the guy at the combine, the receivers were running off, and he did this flip where it was like, he like barrel rolled in the middle of the air. Like the guy can leap out of the gym. Crazy good athlete. You see this with him getting downtown. You see it with him with Yak. You can get him the ball short, intermediate, lead him into space. Really good Yak player as well. The 2 issues with his game that need to be addressed, and if they are, this guy's going to be a long-term starter. Number 1 is the ball skills. 8 drops last year, first year that they were pounding targets his way. And the other issue with that I was referring to, it sort of goes along with this, but it's a lack of play strength. He's taller, 6'1", but he is stick thin. And the couple areas you saw that manifest when teams would try to press him, if the corner can get their hands on Tai Felton, it stuns his progress forward. It's like the engine restarting kind of. Yeah. So he's going to have to work on his release package because you're never going to make him into a berserker. They can try to add some muscle onto him, but it's a skinny frame, right? It's a skinny, wiry frame. So the release package is what's going to solve that for you. Then the other thing is at the catch point when he gets jostled. There's some guys, they don't care about that. There's some guys that it's not even going to affect their concentration. You go through their back. Tai Felton does get jostled. And when the flag's not thrown, the ball is descending and there's some jostling going on. It typically takes him out of that moment. I also saw some issues with flipping his hands up late, like fighting the ball, letting it get too close and adjusting your hands. So that thing could probably be worked on by McCardle. McCardle's going to have to get clever with the catch point thing, because if you can't make him stronger, this is probably going to have to do with both body positioning, and then also, well, probably body position, concentration as well. And if you refine that hand technique I was talking about, maybe that helps a little bit too. But I do think the upside is very real here. That kid was awesome last year at Maryland. And again, the athletic profile, that all plays. And we have seen NFL caliber flashes and star flashes from him even. And the athleticism speaks for itself. But yeah, just need to refine a couple of those things.
So is this a player who, at least initially, you could use as a target, Thor, on short passes and then yak? Because it feels like that is, I think they signed Rondale Moore a little bit for that, but the reality is he's been hurt. You don't know. He's smaller as well. So is this a player who, at least as a rookie, could have some ability to catch an 8-yard pass, a 7-yard pass, that he then turns into a 65-yard touchdown?
That's possible. Yeah, I mean, on his tape, you see some really fun yak plays. I put one out on my Twitter last night. One of them where he had the long explosive off the yak. He can break tackles, and even at the smaller size, he will sometimes have guys slip off him. He's certainly not a berserker, but can be slippery. And then he hits the jets, and when he builds up to that top speed, he is flying. I mean, that kid's athleticism is for real. And I think down the road, you potentially could have the utility of a guy that can win at all three levels. He can definitely get deep, and he's actually a pretty good ball tracker down there too. Right? Like if it's not the guy at the catch point with him, where you're jostling him, you're taking him out of that moment. The ball tracking is really good. He can do it over his shoulder. He can reel in passes. That's not the problem. So just work on that catch point stuff, work on the play string thing, or else give him strategies or tools on the field to work around it one way or the other. And let that athletic profile and that playmaking penchant play up at the next level.
He also, so I've got his Raz profile up. That's right. I have on Sunday morning the Raz profiles up. Hardcore. So not only did he was disappointed, like you said, in the 4.37 or 4.38 40, which still puts him that was a 9.6 on the 0 to 10 Raz score, just the 40 time. But he's also an elite 10-yard split and 20-yard split guy who had 60% of his targets within 9 yards of the line of scrimmage. So, I mean, the Vikings who knows what they do schematically with him, but he has shown in his profile he'll catch passes at or within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage and hit the Jets quickly. So you can see why KOC was very excited about this draft pick.
1,000%. And one thing I'll say, not in defense of his profile, but just to add some context, that the year before at Maryland, Talia Tagovailoa, Tua's brother, was the starting quarterback there. If you think Tua had a noodle arm, check out Talia's old Maryland highlights sometime. Judd, you could throw the ball further than Talia, so that made it difficult for their receivers to get downtown. And then this past year, for a lot of the season, they had this scrambler, Billy Edwards, who I think transferred to Wisconsin. I could be wrong about that over the offseason this year. But anyway, he got a noodle arm too. So some of the downfield stuff, I imagine, he didn't say this to me, but I imagine, it would have been fun for him to work with a stronger arm quarterback. But certainly that stuff that you guys are talking about, and that's where the opportunities were open up for him to show that yak thing. And that's a pretty cool trick he has.
They did, by the way, just speaking of the relative athletic score, the Raz profiles, kind of felt like the Vikings went in prioritizing big-time Raz guys. So can you speak to the other three guys here? Ingram-Dawkins, Kobe King, who I think we snagged Kobe King in a simulation or two. And then we knew they were going to get a tight end somewhere. They wind up with Gavin Bartholomew, and then we'll get to a couple featured UDFAs too. But just give us a couple highlights or not, lowlights, if you don't like these picks from the other three draft picks.
Ingram-Dawkins, they took him a little bit above where I had him on my board, but if he hits, it's a steal.
Big time Raz guy.
Yeah.
Big time Raz guy.
And all of it with his profile, it's upside. The reason that I ranked him lower, it wasn't because I don't see the same thing with the upside that they do. It's that the risk profile I was baking in. And obviously the coaches, I don't know if you guys saw Brian Flores got on the call with him. Brian Flores, it seems like it's very hard to get Brian Flores excited. You don't often see him the emoting, especially when he's talking to other people. He seemed legitimately excited talking to Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins. I've seen him on some of those phone calls over the years. It seemed like he was excited for that one. You have to wonder, was this a Brian Flores pound the table guy and he won the day, when this card was submitted? But this, again, eye of the beholder type prospect, because all of this is projectable. He's not there yet. 6'5", 276, 979 RAS, so 98th percentile size adjusted athlete. He is explosive. He is agile. He has it all, and he's fast too. But the ball of clay thing. So you have the rangy frame. He has length. He's young, 21 years old. ridiculous first step. That's the thing on his tape that you notice. Gets out of his stance real quick and gets on top of that offensive lineman. The agility that he showed in the pre-draft testing, he had the 97 percentile shuttle, 96 percentile 3-cone. That agility is also evident on his tape. He has light feet and he's sudden side to side, bendy, pliable as well. The negatives are currently super raw in general, lacking instincts. That's one thing experientially I think he will get, and obviously he is going to arguably the NFL's best defensive staff. So I think that's the thing where there's a clear path to improvement. The pass rush element of his game needs work. He has some of those tools, like I said, and you see flash plays out of them sometimes, but he has to have a better plan going forward. He has to learn more pass rushing moves. He has to use his length better. So some of those things you're going to have to work through with him. And then play strength is the other thing. He needs to keep adding bulk. And he needs to learn to play with a little bit better leverage as well. Using that length and then getting down there and not losing the leverage game. But you don't have to squint hard to see a long-term 3-4 starting defensive end with this kid. But if it goes the other way, he's going to be viewed as a tweener. So you have to finish out the development here. This is not a finished product, but that's obviously why you got him at the price point that you did.
And he's potentially an inside and outside guy, correct, as well, which is what I think. I think Flores loves what he considers to be positionless players.
Yeah, and Judd, I think where that would manifest for the Vikings, the base obviously is 3-4, so you have the base 3-man front. But as you guys know, sometimes they will go to the 4-man front with the 4 guys with the hand in the dirt. Flores likes mixing all that stuff up. In that alignment, you could kick him inside. You can't do it in the 3-4 because he's not the play strength, the issue. He's not going to be able to do any occupying stuff over the center. He's going to get blasted out of that hole. But on the pure passing downs, you go to a 4-man front, absolutely. You could kick him in there.
And then the other 2 guys, Kobe King and Gavin Bartholomew, were the 201 and the 202.
So let me say, before I even on each of the guys individually, in my opinion, this was essentially found money, both of these picks, because Sam Howell pretty close to probably work that 150, whatever slot that was. Mm-hmm. And then you get the 2 picks in addition to that. The first one, I'm not going to criticize at all. I like the Kobe King pick. I had him 178th on my board, linebacker 14, 6'1", 243, 80th percentile size adjusted athlete. I comped him to Micah McFadden. He a good run defender here in Kobe King, and part of the reason I did it to McFadden was to shout out the special teams utility that they showed in college. Kobe King is going to be a core special teamer right away. So because of that, you have sort of an embedded floor here. He is good. He's absolutely going to make the roster on that thing alone. I also think he's a good depth piece. He was one of the better like true inside linebackers that we had. His game is sort of throwback. It's downhill. It's getting into those gaps and enforcing that. It's taking on offensive linemen and the run game stuff. And he's not quite sideline to sideline. He's a decent athlete, but it's not elite. But he's going to chase you down. He has pretty good instincts for that. I don't love him in coverage either. So it's sort of maybe a profile that's not too dissimilar from the treetops of like an Ivan Pace from a couple of years ago, where it's the run defense. And theoretically, we were thinking with Pace special teams utility potentially if you don't crack the starting lineup right away. But of course, he ended up doing that. So you're going to use Kobe King situationally on defense on the early downs when you bring him onto the field. But usable depth piece there for sure. And again, I believe he will be a core special teamer right away. Like that pick. Didn't like the Bartholomew pick, but again, I will acknowledge I think this pick essentially was free because of the trade transactions, and this was the flavor of the guy they liked. I far preferred Thomas Fedone at the time, who I couldn't even believe was there, and Thomas Fedone ended up going right after Gavin Bartholomew, so that sort of broke my heart. I'll get over it now though, so we'll get on board with Gavin because he's coming to town. 6'5", 246 Gavin Bartholomew, and 89th percentile size adjusted athlete. 98th percentile separation rate last season. However, I have to give the context. That was on a 3rd percentile ADOT. They didn't use him down the field. There was a lot of short shuttle type stuff for him. The coaching staff really likes him. His teammates do. That's why he was a team captain there. He's a decent receiver. But again, in this sort of limited utility that we saw him in, I saw more upside with Thomas Fedone. I had Bartholomew. I had him ranked 408 on my board. So for me, he was more of a UDFA guy. But it's an interesting frame and an interesting athletic profile. You know, the 89th percentile there. He did the full gamut of tests, and they obviously needed tight end depth. We had talked about that. The Vikings had telegraphed that they were going to take a tight end. Only nitpick here is the one that they took.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, Thorsky, I believe that you did give this draft a D grade, correct?
Yeah.
So what was the overall takeaway there for a grade that that might have got you passing in school, but barely got you passing in school, if that?
Yeah. Well, you know, last year, as everybody knows, I either gave the Vikings an A or an A plus. And there was, you know, other people out there, you know, from other, they're like, oh, you're a homer. And it's like, no, I do it on a grading methodology. And last year, my methodology said the Vikings had an A or A plus. This year, my grading methodology had the Vikings at a D. It just was what it was. But it's not, I don't know how many things could have been done to prevent this. Because again, I don't think you had the option in round one. And I don't have a huge nitpick with the prospects that they took after that either. I understand. But with the lack of equity that you had and the lack of flexibility and then the board falling poorly in round one, it locked you in. The reason that the Wall Street guy, Kwesi, why he likes having the flexibility, it's so that you can maneuver, whether it's free agency, whether it's the draft. And obviously to get more maneuverability in the last draft and to end up with Dallas Turner, that cost him it in this class. This wasn't the best draft class. Someone asked me for my letter grade of the draft class as a whole heading in. I said D plus, you know, grading on the curve. So if you were going to do it in one class, this probably was the one to do it. And again, you got your immediate starter, and now you have the awesome offensive line. So that's a benefit of this. But yeah, I mean, hamstrung and you did what you did, but it was more or less hit it down the fairway. Last point I'll make is I do grade on a curve. And so every year in my grade, it's different than with some other folks. So you might be out there and be like, oh, you gave him a D. So I never see people give a D. So that means he thinks it's the worst draft in the NFL. No, I give out 2 Fs. I give out 2 D minuses. You know, and again, it's a lot of ROI stuff. And when you're penned in with the flexibility, it's hard to get to go BPA there and with the limited picks. So that's where I ended up coming down on the Vikings class. I didn't hate it. And I certainly understood the decisions that were made, and I agreed with several of them.
One last thing here, because we know you got to go. You've been super busy all year so far, and you got more stuff today here. But we'll do more UDFA stuff on Thursday.
We're doing the deep dive on Thursday.
We will, and you're gonna scour the league and have all sorts of stuff on FantasyLife.com. But Kwesi has been a master at locking in like the top or one of the top 2 or 3 UDFAs every Ivan Pace, boom, give him a little bit more money. Last year, Gabriel Murphy and a couple others. You could argue that Logan Brown, now biased here because he's Jeremiah Cyril's guy and we've been talking about him, but he's a Kansas guy too, so you're double biased. But Logan Brown was like 160th on the consensus big boards. There was some third round steam for him, and the Vikings wind up getting him as a UDFA. You've also talked about Tyler Batty, the edge rusher from BYU. They snagged, I think, Trey Stewart, running back, Jacksonville State. It's Jacksonville State, Conference USA, but this dude ran for 1,600 yards and 25 touchdowns last year. So just high-level thoughts on UDFA with a deeper dive coming in a few days.
Yeah, so Thursday I'll be able to give you guys my UDFA class rankings. That's something we're going to be working on the next couple of days. I have a grading methodology for that as well. I'm pretty sure the Vikings are going to acquit themselves pretty well once again this year. That's been sort of a theme with Kwesi the last couple of years. He's done well in UDFA, and this year, one of the advantages of only having the 4-man draft class, you have a better argument to agents when you're trying to convince them to sign with you. I think people would be surprised out there. It's not always, in fact, maybe even less than half the time, that the highest signing bonus that people choose, it's generally the best opportunity, as long as the signing bonuses are even close. And because the real prize is making the week 1 roster. That's where you get the real money if you're a UDFA. These are the rankings. So we'll get into that. We'll get into the more specific prospects on Thursday, but I will give you guys the rankings of the Vikings UDFAs as they appeared on my UDFA board right after the draft. Logan Brown, number 1 available UDFA, and offensive line. This guy, I believe, is going to make the week 1 roster. I think he is a usable depth piece. And there's a couple guys who were on the roster last year that I like his game more than. We can talk about that more in depth on Thursday. Tyler Batty, you brought him up. Big defensive end, productive at BYU. Started a lot of years there. He was 47th. Our boy Max Brosmer, The Vikes sign him as well. He becomes the I guess the fourth QB. So it's going to be him against Rippon in camp, I suppose. But he was 58th. Joe Hebert, the offensive lineman, 73rd. Trey Stewart, you mentioned 96th, and then 2-4. I had 5 other guys that they signed outside of those names I just mentioned that made my 500 board. I do like Trey Stewart, Phil. You know, I did have him as a UDFA, of course, but super duper productive last year in the Rich Rod system. He's a little bit smaller, and some of the passing game stuff we haven't seen as much with him, but he was uber productive as a runner last year. You like the instincts with him. He has good agility. He makes people miss. He is on the smaller side, and again, the measurables aren't the best, but he does have instincts for running. He can make people miss. I do think he has a shot to compete with Chandler for RB3. I was a little bit disappointed that in this historical running back class, Kwesi could not figure out a way to use even a late day 3 pick on a running back. He ends up going the UDFA route. I did think there was a couple running backs I would have preferred in UDFA to Trey Stewart, but Trey Stewart is not a bad option. And again, he has the game to immediately press Ty Chandler.
Yeah, should be fun, man. Hey, awesome stuff, Thor. We appreciate you jumping on here on a Sunday and just all your coverage throughout the last several weeks and months. You're one of the best in the business, and we're excited to do the deeper dive recap on Thursday, the actual Thursday this week, and then keep it rolling here into the off season. So hopefully you can find a couple hours to sleep sometime in the near future.
Get some rest.
Appreciate it, boys. I will. I'll try.
All right,
there he is. You can find him, Thor KU, on Twitter. We just want the Vikings to win a Super Bowl before we die. See you.